I'd found 2 injured, perverted little snakes, and they would not stop trying to crawl down the collar of my shirt. I was dangling one from each hand, right in the middle of scolding them, when translucent text boxes suddenly appeared in front of my eyes. Oh my god. Those are the brooding male lead and the unhinged villain. How dare this side character talk to them like that? She used to bully them when they were kids. She's a major reason they had their villain origin story. This whole chance encounter was actually planned by both of them to get their revenge. They just burned through too much of their energy fighting. Once they recover, they'll use their true forms, yards and yards of them, to crush her and eat her. What? I had never bullied a snake in my life. Still, the 2 snakes coiled around my wrist did exactly what the comments described. They bared their fangs at me. The incident had happened a few days earlier. I found them on my way home, 2 small snakes fighting on the edge of the walking path. It was interesting enough that I stopped to watch from a distance. One was the color of polished ink, the other was a stark porcelain white. They were barely a foot long, 2 thin little things that were, in their own way, kind of cute. But they fought with the fury of dragons. Their upper bodies were tangled in a tight knot, mouths gaping wide. Both already showed signs of the skirmish, little scrapes and nicks on their scales. The white snake managed to roll over, pinning the black one. It reared back, fangs bared, ready to strike at the other's head. Just as it was about to land the blow, its eyes met mine and it froze. I must have startled it. The black snake seized the opportunity, twisting and sinking its teeth into the white one from below, instantly reversing their positions. But the white snake didn't fight back. It went limp, letting the black one bite, its bright, rosy pink eyes fixed on me. A pang of sympathy hit me. Bolstering my courage, I took a step forward and clapped my hands. Hey! Knock it off! To my utter astonishment, the black snake actually seemed to understand. It stopped its attack. The white snake lay on the grass, exposing its soft underbelly. The bite marks were clear against its pale scales. It looked on the verge of death. The black snake stared at me with its beady black eyes, then glanced at the motionless white snake beside it. A frantic energy seized it, its tongue flicked in and out so fast it was a blur. It looked like it was trying desperately to speak. Seeing my bewildered expression, it gave up and simply copied the white one, flopping onto the grass and going perfectly still. I figured that was a truce and turned to continue home. It wasn't until I was standing at my front door, digging through my purse for my keys, that I realized they had followed me. Our eyes met, all 6 of them, in perfect unison. Both snakes went limp and dropped to the welcome mat with a soft thump. It was the most blatant case of insurance fraud I'd ever seen. You want to come home with me? Both of them started wagging their tails furiously. I hesitated. Wild snakes can be dirty, carry parasites, and I'm pretty sure there are rules against just picking up wildlife. The white snake stopped moving, its tongue flicking out pathetically. The black one, however, began spinning in tight circles, as if trying to show me that it wasn't wild at all. After a moment of internal debate, I let them in. I didn't have a proper terrarium, so a clear plastic storage bin would have to do for now. Surprisingly, they were almost unnervingly obedient. When I pointed to the bin, they slithered right in. I spent a while on my phone, using an image recognition app to figure out what they were. The consensus was corn snakes. Following the app's links, I found a beginner's guide and ordered antiseptic spray and other supplies for delivery. While I waited, I spoke to the bin. From now on, I'll call you Ash, I said to the black one. And you'll be Ivory. I didn't actually expect them to understand. My impression of snakes had always been that they were cold, detached creatures, not particularly in tune with humans. When the supplies arrived and I was unboxing the antiseptic, I said aloud, "Okay, Ivory, you're first." To my shock, the little white snake nudged the lid of the bin with his head and slithered out on his own. He even rubbed against my palm like a cat, a bizarrely affectionate gesture. Inside the bin, Ash curled into a tight, miserable ball in the corner, head lowered. He wasn't even flicking his tongue anymore. "Ash," I tried. He lifted his head to look at me, and I could have sworn I saw a glimmer of hope in his almost featureless face. Ivory licked my palm with his forked tongue as if hurrying me along. Ivory's wounds look worse. So he goes first. I'll get to you right after, okay? I told Ash. His head drooped back down. I carefully straightened Ivory out on a towel and gently applied antiseptic to each of his wounds. I checked his scales for mites or parasites and found none. When I was done, I switched him out for Ash and did the same. Ash was just as clean. My theory solidified: they weren't wild. They had to be someone's lost pets. It was the only explanation for them being so clean and well-behaved. As I examined Ash more closely, I discovered a larger wound hidden among the scales near his neck. No wonder he seemed so dejected earlier. His injury was more severe. It was simply harder to see against his dark coloring. "Oh, you poor thing," I murmured, gently rubbing his little belly to comfort him. Ash lay on the table, eyes closed, occasionally issuing a soft hiss of contentment. Now it was Ivory's turn to sulk. In the corner of the bin, the picture of reptilian misery, I reached in and scooped Ivory out, wanting to give him a comforting belly rub too. But the little snake twisted and squirmed, evading my touch every time. I let out an amused laugh and gently poked his head. "What's wrong, Ivory?" "Such a..." He coiled into a tight ball and ignored me. Finding it funny, I poked his side. "Hello? Anybody home?" That finally got a reaction. Ivory uncoiled, rolled over, and exposed his belly. Ash, seeing this, grew agitated. He started slithering back and forth in front of Ivory, blocking my path. I nudged him aside. Before my fingers could even touch Ivory, Ash bit me. It wasn't hard, more of a firm pinch meant to get my attention. "Ash, you have to learn to share," I said, lifting him up and moving him further away. It was a mistake. He arched his body like a spring and launched himself directly at my collar. I reached up to grab him, but he was too quick. He disappeared down the front of my shirt. I had no choice but to pull the collar open to see where he'd gone. Just then, Ivory, who had been so docile, decided to join the chaos, darting into my collar as well. I really should have just lifted the hem of my shirt. The cold, slithering sensation of two snakes against my skin sent a shiver down my spine. They moved around frantically, their scales creating a dry, rustling friction. I quickly pulled my shirt up, only to find them fighting again. Was this why they were abandoned? "Ash. Ivory. No fighting." At the sound of my voice, both snakes froze, slowly closing their mouths. I grabbed one in each hand, dangling them by their tails. "No more fighting. Do you understand me?" I lectured. "If I catch you two fighting again, I swear I'll turn you into soup. You hear me?" The moment the words left my mouth, the translucent text boxes returned as if someone had left a live comment feed hovering in my vision. Lol. Does she really think he's trying to flatter her? He's trying to figure out the best place to kill her. Weren't the male lead and the villain venomous? I seem to remember that she bullied them as kids and now she just keeps doing things to piss them off. I wonder if her death is going to be particularly gruesome. A knot of dread formed in my stomach. I quickly lifted my pajama top. There on my abdomen were several faint reddish marks. They looked like bite marks. They hadn't broken the skin, but the intent was terrifyingly clear. These two snakes were actually trying to kill me. But I had never, ever bullied a snake. Was it because I threatened to turn them into soup? Could they really be that petty? I tried to act as normal as possible as I placed them back in their bin, this time weighing the lid down with 2 heavy books. I pulled out my phone and reposted the Found Pets ad on every platform I could think of. The snake owner community was a lot smaller than the ones for cats and dogs. My post got a few comments but no messages for days. True to form, the two snakes were on their best behavior. They didn't fight again, though it was clear they still couldn't stand each other. They were constantly vying for who would get petted first, a petty rivalry I had to mediate. If I petted Ash first one night, Ivory was first the next. With the fighting issue resolved, they developed a new bad habit. Every night after I'd fallen asleep, they would nudge the lid off their bin and slither into my bed. I laid down the law 3 separate times, but the 4th time I woke up to find them both plastered against my skin. I gave up. I was getting used to their cool temperature anyway. If no one claimed them, could I just release them? But would that make them hate me even more? I posted the Found Pet ad at 7 in the morning, more out of guilt than optimism. By 9 it had 300 views and 2 snarky replies. Corn snakes? LOL bad pets, and why would anyone take snakes in? Gross. By noon, a user named Soft Voices of Venom had left a comment that made my stomach drop. Brooding male lead, an unhinged villain? Classic. They'll wrap her like ribbon. I laughed because what else do you do when the internet says something creepy? You laugh. Then I pressed my thumb against the screen and scrolled, and the little translucent text boxes popped up again, hovering just above the ad like literal live chat captions. It's one thing to read comments. It's another to have them floating in front of your face like our spam. They didn't belong to the site, nobody else could see them, they were private in a way that felt too intimate. I tilted my head, thinking maybe it was my phone glitching. My phone had been acting weird lately. It would autocorrect names to song titles and wake up to show me ads for things I'd only murmured into my pillow. I told myself, rationally and loudly, that it was the unemployment stress and too much online late at night. Soft Voices of Venom left more comments. The audience and the overlay grew. They were not only describing the snakes, they were scripting the scene, line by line, in the kind of performative shorthand that could turn anything into a drama. Parts of me loved that, loved the clarity it offered. It was as if someone had handed me a lens that made background noise into narrative. The problem was which narrative. The kinder voices wanted a rescue story, the meaner ones wanted an execution. The meaner ones were louder. The first bite itself had been small, a theatrical thing that left crescent marks. The second time, 3 nights later, when the snakes found their way on my pajama top, was different. I woke up not to pain but to an image that shoved itself into me the way a cold pool shoves your lungs. It wasn't a memory that I could claim, it was something I watched, as crisp as a film and twice as shameful. I saw myself at 12, small and mean in an adolescent way that still makes my jaw ache when I think about it. We were in the back corridor of the school, a narrow place with lockers that smelled like plastic and half sweat. I had a group with me, girls with glossy hair and sharp laughter, and 2 boys who kept to themselves. Their names were Jonah and Micah. I could not tell you before that night how I knew their names. In the dream image they were both in profile and the world pronounced them for me, Jonah, Micah. I remember the exact stupid thing I did. I shoved a terrarium locker open and pushed something in, a harmless thing I'd rationalize as a prank, something alive that would make them scream. There were snakes in the prop closet. I don't know why I thought it would be funny. We made ourselves laugh about how they might freak out, how silly they'd be. Jonah touched the terrarium for a picture and I pushed him so his elbow knocked the lid. The snakes were tiny. They weren't venomous. They were like the ones now, cold and glossy and confused. But it was enough. Micah shrieked and shoved, Jonah fell and his face hit the tile. The girl circled him in mock concern while I filmed with my phone, the recording laughing in the background. I watched myself in that replay and then the laughter was a physical thing, like wind, and I got to feel it. It's one thing to remember in a dry, cognitive way that you were mean, it's another to have your skin relive the heat of the crowd. In the memory, Jonah's face split into a laugh that was not joy but survival. He pretended not to be hurt. Micah clung to the railing. Afterwards, they were quiet for weeks. They transferred schools. The rumor was that Jonah had run away. The rumor was that Micah had been suspended. I had been praised for being funny, for being gutsy, for being cool. Nobody ever connected those 2 invisible things. The bite didn't injure me further physically. Instead, when the snake's teeth brushed my skin, they seemed to open a door into Jonah's and Micah's private room, an archive of small humiliations and quiet hunger. I felt, more than saw, a line of nights where Jonah stayed awake and listened to the house settle, where Micah would learn to take apart watches and reassemble them to keep busy. There were moments of warmth, an aunt who let them sleep on a shed floor and a teacher who slipped notes into Jonah's hand about scholarship programs. There were also things I had not known, the exact way their mouths tasted of copper when they learned to make knives in the garage of a cousin with a temper, the particular way they buttoned their shirts when they were scared. I woke up with the overlay full of people calling me a villain and abuser in karma. The crowds loved a tidy story where cruel kids grow into cruel adults and get eaten for their sins. But instead of running, I did something worse. I wrote a comment back. It was stupid, defensive, human. I typed, I never bullied anyone. I was a kid. You don't know what happened. My brain was a politician for itself, making promises I didn't keep. The overlay of comments flickered. Someone wrote, she's gaslighting. Another wrote, she did it. But then a smaller comment, one that seemed to come from between the lines, asked something I hadn't considered. Do you remember Jonah and Micah? The question felt like a splinter. I thought of lockers, of laughter, of the way I had circled back in my life to choose safety over shame. I tried to say their names out loud, and I couldn't at first because they felt thick and old in my throat. Finally I whispered, Jonah? Micah? It wasn't brave. It was not a public confession. It was a breath in a kitchen at 2 a.m., hands still trembling from holding the snakes. I started to notice little clues, like breadcrumbs, in other memories I'd smoothed over. A handwriting sample on an old yearbook that showed Jonah's precise loops. A photo at my cousin's wedding where a young boy stood at the edge of the frame with a paper crown. I had always assumed the boy in the frame was some kid, an extra in the background. But when I compared the jawline, the tilt of the ear, the scar near the chin, my insides folded like origami. That week the overlay changed tone. People who had been screaming for blood began to ask questions. The narrative turned from condemnation into inquiry. I don't know if it was because I had written that single stupid defensive reply or because the snakes had shown me too much. Maybe the internet itself, which loves a scandal but loves a redemption arc almost as much, pivoted. But the change also felt like a reciprocal thing. As the comments softened, the bite visions changed too. Instead of being an accusatory slideshow, they started to show the boys as full, messy human beings. They showed Jonah teaching an 8-year-old to skip stones, showed Micah painting a mural with chipped brushes. They showed both of them later, older, practicing snakes in the dark, whispering stories into scales like confessions. One night I pretended to be brave and posted the full thing. I told the story of the locker and the video and the shame and the way I laughed while they fell. I did not write it for likes. I wrote it because the bites had carved a gouge in me, and the thing I feared most was the way silence makes you complicit. The post was long and awkward and not a tearjerker because I do not do tearjerkers well. I said I was sorry in the blunt, adult way that apologizes with an intent to change rather than to absolve. The overlay blew up. There was the predictable pile-on, of course. There were also messages that made me weep. One user wrote, I was Jonah at 13, and left a paragraph about loneliness that matched the way the snake's memories had tasted. Another user, a woman named Marauder Smuse, said, go find them. She left coordinates of an abandoned community theater 3 towns over and an email address. They asked me to leave it, she wrote. The theater had been a place where kids met to make cheap stage props and where a prop keeper kept a box of rubber snails and rubber snakes for effect. A lot of industrious teenagers learned awkward skills there. I did not know whether to go. I wanted to be brave but not in a way that would be performative. I wanted to atone but not for a camera. I wanted to show up in the real world where apologies might mean something. On a damp afternoon I drove out to the coordinates. The theater was smaller than I imagined, a sagging roof and a red door with paint peeled off in curls. Inside the lobby the smell of old popcorn and dust made my nose ache. There were flyers for long-past shows, a set of hand-painted stars leaning against a wall, and, in the back room by the loading dock, a shoebox with a label, props, snakes. The shoebox had been taped shut so many times its cardboard had the texture of a map. I knocked on the coach office door because I had to, and the door opened to a man with a lined face who smelled like coffee in winter. He looked at me the way people look at acquaintances who show up where you least expect them, surprised but not hostile. You the one who posted? He asked. I told him yes. He sighed. They'll be here, he said. They always were. The boys, he hesitated. Jonah left a note. He handed me a folded envelope with my name on it in small, careful handwriting that flashed like a memory. Inside were 2 Polaroids. One showed Jonah and Micah as kids, grinning like fools, snakes curled across their shoulders like jewelry. The other showed them 3 years later, older, in the same theater, with sawdust in their hair and a mural of a river behind them. I sat on the folding chairs until the chairs swallowed me. The door opened and 2 men stepped in. They were not monstrous. They were not particularly brooding in the way that the internet would label them. They were ordinary, and that ordinariness made them more dangerous than anything. Jonah's hair was cropped short at the temples, Micah's hands had ink stains. They looked like people who had learned to make things out of what life gave them. They could have been anyone's ex-schoolmates. When Jonah looked at me I saw a flicker, not hate, not the theatrical rage the commenters had wanted, but a very particular coldness like the space left when a wound closes over. You remember now, Micah said, voice flat. They did not need to yell. They did not need to stage a revenge. The snakes had been a language, the bites a translator, and my acknowledgement was the only thing that unknotted the story. They told their side, not as a long speech but in jagged sentences and small details. Jonah remembered being shoved. Micah remembered the way kids laughed at him in the hallway. The two had split their energies in different directions, Jonah toward quiet making and then toward something darker that made him hard, Micah toward theater and toward learning how to hold things steady. Nobody had thought to ask, and nobody had thought to look beyond their own little mirrors. They told me why they'd left the snakes with me. It wasn't purely vengeance, they said. It was a test. They wanted to know whether the person on their doorstep could be changed. They had heard my admission online and then watched me try to be honest. They wanted to be sure it wasn't performative. Ash and Ivory were the oldest, stupidest, most symbolic test they could think of, something that would force me into a physical, not just verbal, reckoning. You could have just not shown up, I said. We tried that, Jonah said. For a long time. But we got tired of rearranging our lives to avoid being what we were told we were. He looked at Micah and that small look seemed to be an entire private weather report between them. The snakes remember, he said, and for the first time I understood, they had kept snakes as children because snakes are honest in the ways people aren't. They don't pretend. They coil and they uncoil, they feed or they don't. They are small, simple, and they keep time with their bodies. Micah came closer and reached for the shoebox, lifting out the snakes as if handing back a mirror. We wanted them to have a chance, he said, and when he touched Ash and Ivory, both little creatures turned toward him with a slow, perfect recognition. We wanted them to judge you. Then we wanted them to teach you. They taught me that night more than I could have learned from comment threads or confessions. They taught me that a genuine apology is not a public post but a pattern of acts. They taught me that sometimes the thing you fear most is not the vengeance of others but the way your own memory will not let you go. They did not sign any social media posts. They left with their snakes and with a promise to keep an eye on me from afar. They said, "We're not monsters. We wanted to be sure you were not either." It would be easy to call that the end. But the internet was not so obliging. The overlay came at me later that night while I lay awake thinking about Jonah and Micah driving home with the snakes coiled around their shoulders like quiet, living trophies. The comments fell into a new cadence, people arguing about repentance, about whether theater towns and small-town cruelty deserve forgiveness. I watched an argument bloom about me and my confession. In the center of it, a user named Soft Voices of Venom, who had been cheering for my theatrical death, posted one line I didn't expect: "She did it. She remembered. Now what?" I typed back, "Now we do something that shocks you. We do something boring. We keep showing up." It felt anticlimactic and real. I started small. I edited my post to add the names Jonah and Micah, small things that felt like offering breadcrumbs. See, these are human beings. A week later I went to volunteer at the community theater and shelved props for pay or for free or for both. The theater was a small thing that needed dusting. I got a part-time job shelving stage lights and learning how to fix a stuck pulley. I texted Jonah once to ask if he wanted his Polaroids. He didn't text back, but 3 weeks later there was a mug on the desk with paint flecks and a note that said, "Keep coming." The real twist, the part that changed everything for me, arrived in the form of an overlay comment that read, "What if the comments aren't predicting? What if they're asking?" It hit me then like a cold hand. The text boxes had not been prophecy. They were invitations. Each snide remark, each call for spectacle, each horrified gasp was a voice asking the world to be made in a particular shape. The more people demanded a violent ending, the more the world tried, sometimes dangerously, to match the script. But the same was true in reverse, when a few people asked a different question: can she change? The narrative splintered and allowed room. That understanding did something ugly and wonderful at the same time. I realized we are all characters in each other's narratives, and the narratives we write for people can be violent or gentle. The snakes, Ash and Ivory, were physical proofs of that fact. The boys who kept snakes were physical proofs too. The internet is not fate. It's a kind of social weather. If you stand under it long enough, you either get soaked or you learn how to hold an umbrella. Months later something small and delicate happened. A charity for kids who loved weird animals put up a picture of Jonah and Micah working on a mural for an after-school program. The caption thanked volunteers and included a link to donate. The thread below it was decent, ordinary human sentences, no calls for theatrical deaths, no overlay of fangs. A commenter wrote, "From snakes to murals. Redemption is messy." That line got a lot of upvotes. I met Jonah again once, unintentionally, at a meeting where they needed set designers. He didn't look at me hard. He looked at me the way a person looks at a stranger who used to be somebody they once knew. Micah waved from across the room and I waved back. There was no sash of forgiveness draped over the moment, there was only action, hauling plywood, measuring, cutting, painting. The snakes lived with them and sometimes visited therapy classes, which is a sentence I could not have imagined writing a year ago. Ash and Ivory were no longer my harbingers of doom but strangely, stubbornly, ordinary pets with particular habits. The last strange thing that happened, the real last twist, was not cinematic. It was a quiet shift in the overlay. The translucent boxes returned one night, right when I had almost forgotten how they had felt, and this time they said something I hadn't heard before: remember to feed the snakes. A banal instruction. I smiled, because I had, in the interim, learned how to be responsible for living things and for my past. The comments did not stop. They never would. But the worst of them were not omens, they were invitations to a story with a shape we could still decide together. So here's the ridiculous moral: if you like morals, people will script you whether you ask them to or not. Sometimes those scripts want you punished. Sometimes they want you exalted. The real trick is to refuse the neat plot and to be boringly, persistently accountable. The snakes taught me to listen. Jonah and Micah taught me that cruelty has a long half-life and that apologies require work, not theater. The internet taught me to be suspicious every time a crowd wants blood. And me, I learned to show up, to shelve props, to sweep stage dust out of corners where it gathers like old stories. Once, a comment box told me I would be crushed and eaten. I expected a horror story. Instead I got a small, stubborn human life involving repair, paint, and a pair of snakes who insist on sleeping across my feet when they visit. If that is not the least cinematic ending possible, then I don't know what is. It's not dramatic. It's ordinary. It's the kind of ending I can live with, which, in the end, is the only ending that matters.